just took a penis in my butt. I just wanted something I could feel.
High Guardian Spice is an American homebrew hentai produced by Crunchyroll, the greatest anime producer of all time. In case you didn't know the background for this anime, Crunchyroll, a company known for not adequately compensating anime studios whose works they license, decided to make an anime themselves. You know, that thing that can cost upwards of $100,000 per episode? And considering Crunchyroll is based in San Francisco, California, as opposed to anywhere else, the taxes there will be significantly higher, meaning that the overall cost of production is likely more. Yeah, that Crunchyroll. And if you think that I am being lazy using pre-made material, at least I'm using my own video edits instead of adding PNGs from real life and putting it in my heartwarming animation. One thing to say for clarity for my previous video, apparently the two women were just Sage's relatives and hold no position relative to the school. I called them fucking dorm leaders or something last review, and that is inaccurate. I want to make an actual good faith criticism of the series, so onto the rest of the review. We start off at High Guardian Academy, where Rosemary and Sage meet their new friends, Time and Parsley, who gives Rosemary her locket back. They then see their headmaster, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, who say that, though there is a code, all students must make their own to abide by, and reflect back on the older they get. Unfortunately, we do not see most of their oaths in full, which means that we waste time instead of having any useful characterization so that we can compare it to the end of the series. The girls' first day doesn't go as planned. They are separated for all of their classes except for their general elective, but even then, they chose different courses since Sage is a magician and Rosemary is a warrior. They both feel slightly sad over it, since they do almost everything together, which can be relatively interesting to go over since it can show that even genuine, loving, platonic or otherwise relationships can be toxic since they prevent one or all parties involved in the relationship from engaging in other social overtures. Of course, this plot thread is dropped almost as quickly as it is brought up. We then have a demon MILF teaching an ethics class, where she grabs two lizards and turns one into a hamster and the other into a spiked bug thing, while stating that fear of others is what drives conflict. She asks Rosemary what she thinks should happen, to which she answers that both of them should have spikes. MILF-sensei then says that neither of them should have spikes, and that the mere presence of weapons should determine one's actions. I know I said I would try to not bring politics into this, but they did shoot first. So I'm gonna go on a limb and say that the writer who made this episode is very anti-gun. What they do not realize then is that they're advocating for a pro-gun argument. And on top of that, what they're showing is contradicting what they are saying. The mere presence of weapons should not determine our actions, yes, but we can see one of the animals actively abusing the presence of weapons in their disposal. Therefore, naturally, the other one should arm itself and protect itself. Of course, like anything, there are multiple ways to view this, and the other way of viewing it is the writer advocating for a sort of Team America World Police, as opposed to letting nations resolve their own conflicts when there are only two parties affected. We cut to Sage learning about rooms from Professor Caraway, Rosemary's mom's old friend, where Sage is being made fun of for using old magic instead of new magic, making Sage feel isolated. How is this new magic different from old magic? The later episode showed the difference between new and old as literally just magic, but with extra steps. Parsley is then shown being leagues above her class since she works at her family's blacksmith shop, so she gets bumped up to the highest blacksmithing class. The duo then meet up again where they express distaste towards other kids who made fun of them in their classes, and quickly reconcile with the fact that they don't have any classes together by realizing that lunch exists. And, you know, they live together. Neither of them are encouraged to change in the slightest. Sage isn't forced to stand up for herself. I suppose you could argue that not having Rosemary defend her against purple-haired girl encourages her to do well in the potion-making class, where the whole class except Sage is poisoned by the teacher. But the point of that event is Sage showing her worth in spite of other people thinking that her methods of magic are useless and severely outdated. They then walk around campus trying out different general electives, which are called focus classes in this world, before a scene that cuts between the events of Sage in the aforementioned potion class and Rosemary being the worst of her class in combat. The episode then ends with a scene of various vows which shows the cores of each character, after the main cast was introduced and given ample characterization. If only the budget could be as superfluous as the writing. Also, the main academy bow is kinda doo-doo. Thyme is being a cold bitch like always, and Rosemary breaks the hilt of her mother's sword, which is big sad since it was her mom's sword, and her mom is either dead or missing without a trace. A quirky girl suffering the consequences of her unchecked behavior? This could be interesting. The girls then walk to their next classes, but Caraway calls Rosemary to his office. At the end of Parsley's class, her teacher gives her a task that makes her go into a vent with a tiny tool. Flashback to Rosemary's mother teaching her about sword fighting, then back to her in Caraway's office, learning that, a little trivia for you, he was a she, and that she was friends with her mom. Parsley is having her own adventure, seeing glowing crab thingies, while solving puzzles with her tiny hammer. Sage is cooking black tar and talking to a cat about her concerns with not being accustomed to new magic, but purple hair cunt bitch, whose name I forgot, spills over the cauldron, turning the cat into furfag bait. We then learn that Rosemary's mother didn't break her sword, but instead, it is damage sustained from one of her mother's encounters with a manticore, where they almost die. Caraway tells her that scratches and wear on a weapon show that the tool fulfilled its true purpose before fixing the sword similar to how he fixed it when it was first broken, which makes it look as though it was not damaged in the first place. There are two problems with this. Can you spot them? The first obvious problem is Caraway equating a scratch to a broken pommel. A little trivia for you, pommels were initially intended to prevent a sword from slipping from one's hands, but were later introduced with other purposes in mind, mainly as a counterweight or something for bludgeoning when one's sword was in an awkward position. On the other hand, scratches, for the most part, don't really do anything in terms of combat other than make a weapon look old. Despite that, it is never brought up in the show as a reason why Caraway repairs it instead of not repairing it, which will have her message about wear and tear showing a weapon's full purpose resonate a lot more. The second problem is, as stated before, that Caraway repairs the weapon. Though, as also stated before, it is logical to want to repair a pommel, but you have a combination of bullshit fantasy logic and the fact that the importance of a pommel is never brought up in universe, as we have never seen Rosemary bludgeon anybody with her pommel. Nor does it seem like the type that serves any function other than a decorative one, considering it has a gem there that is very brittle. One of the alternatives to this is that you can make it so that she did break the pommel. You can then make it so that, in the fight with the Manticore, Rosemary's mom breaks the blade of her sword, forcing her to sand it down with a whetstone, and making the blade a fraction of the size it used to be. Making the message an even stronger one of how both incompetence and successes make up the tools we use, and we need those to keep as reminders of what we can do and what we need to work on. We go back to Sage's story, and Time steps in to shoot the cat with a sleeping arrow, which only halts the cat for a short while. The cat goes to a tree wrapped in purple roots/vines and sticks a staff into it, making the roots recede. Time sees this and looks concerned over it as we zoom out to a side view of the cliff and see purple roots under the tree. Credit where credit is due, the writers were able to give a sense of consistency when it comes to the world, since this episode starts off with the dorms being cleared out due to a glow crab infestation, which is a direct result of the last episode where Parsley let out a family of them when doing the trials set up by the blacksmith. At least the show uses continuity to its advantage in spite of all the other contradictions they have. Time says she's going to camp out in the woods instead of staying with her mother because her mom is busy, but Parsley insists that she goes to her home instead of sleeping in the woods all alone. Parsley then introduces Time to her siblings and mother, Ange, who shows Parsley her new sister. Sage and Rosemary then go to their aunts, who give Sage a Terra Spear, which is a magic staff or wand in this universe, but it's too big for Sage to handle, so her cousins promise to take her to the Terra Spear shop the next day. Parsley expresses her disappointment in her mother for not telling her about the fact that she has a sister, since her and Parsley would be the only daughters in the family. At the dinner table, they tell her that they want her to quit school, because they have a lot of work to do, and they heavily relied on Parsley in terms of both the shop as well as raising children. And they see her wanting to be a guardian as nothing more than just a phase. The next morning, Sage's cousins take the girls to a magic shop, where Sage tells Rose that she doesn't want to use the Terra Spear due to her mom not liking new magic, but she doesn't want to get rid of it as a whole because she doesn't want to be rude to her cousins. Sage ends up finding a magic conduit that is to her liking, as evident by wind swirling around her. Oh my gosh, wind swirling around somebody getting a magic wand? That's so original and passionate. How can this possibly get more heartwarming? Parsley is forging a sword when Time's mother walks into the shop. She sees Time in the shop and is disappointed that Time didn't say anything about staying with somebody other than her. They both make statements about each other prioritizing competence over relationships. Parsley then talks to her parents about how she wants to do something different than what she was doing for her whole life up to then, but she's interrupted when they realize that one of her brothers is on the roof. Parsley uses her proficiency in handling her brothers, and Time uses her proficiency in archery to help him get down safely. Sage then, at her cousin's house, apologizes for getting the Terra Spear even though she thinks that she shouldn't have it, so her cousins decide to show her that her mother was also using new magic. Wow, the difference between new magic and old magic must be a drastic one if people are willing to bend over backwards and act viscerally whenever they see a magic that is not of their liking. Time bickers with her mom a bit more, and Parsley's parents allow her to go to school. And that concludes episode 4. A commonality with all the subplots is parental conflict. Here's why they're bland at best. Parsley's arc has her parents want her back to help out with their family, but we don't actually see her have to reflect on any of the repercussions of leaving. The scene where her brother gets stuck on the roof and forces her to come in and save the day somehow makes her parents think it would be a good idea to support her in leaving home, as opposed to wanting her stay due to their incompetence and inability to handle their own children, verily having the potential of putting their children in danger, which would imply that the parents don't give a fuck about their children. This is something that could be fixed if Parsley were to point out the fact that they are incompetent and they should suffer the consequences of this. Having multiple flashbacks and other events that we haven't seen yet would be the easiest way of doing it. However, the best way of showcasing this is already in the show. Her parents breed like rabbits, not even a quarter of a way through the semester, and they've already had another kid. And since this is a mature-rated show on Crunchyroll, the show has the ability to show that her parents are completely consumed by lust. And Parsley leaving would be forcing her entire family to grow up as quickly as she was forced to. For a more Disney Channel ending, you can have her have conversations with the oldest brother in her family about whether she should stay at home or she should stay in school, motivating him to take the leadership role amongst his siblings. You can still have the scene where Time and Parsley save one of Parsley's brothers, but make a slight change to it. At the very end, have one of the brothers she had a conversation with save the one that is in danger, showing that he is both willing and capable of serving and protecting his family. With Sage, the difference between old and new magic is not very well defined at the time, so the audience sees it as a worthless farce, since we are given less than a vague blueprint of the ideals that new magic is supposed to represent. Though the audience can assume that it's representative of the liberal-conservative dichotomy, it doesn't really matter that much because it doesn't stand on its own. Time's mom being weird sets up a whole subplot for the whole entire series, and Rosemary doesn't do anything this episode. And that's the end of episode 4. I was initially going to do a review of the entire series in one single video, but there's a bunch of other projects that are actually of interest to me and don't cause me physical pain when I'm viewing/experiencing them. And on top of that, there's schoolwork, so So here's what I'll do for you. I'll make a bet with you. 100 likes on this video or more. And you know what I'll do? I'll actually start scripting the next video in this series. Please take your fucking time when you're pressing the like button. Please just, take a long good while before pressing it.